Good morning again, everyone. So welcome to the third of our bite-sized series of webinars. Today we're going to show you how easy it is to gain access to an email account, even if it has multi-factor authentication enabled. So I'm Johnny, this is Lewis. We're both client relationship managers here at Enhanced.
Morning everyone, just to go through the quick agenda before we start our presentation today. So I'm going to go through a quick introduction to who Enhanced are, who we work with and how we help businesses. Then moving on to my colleague Johnny, he's going to be going through Evil Jinx and doing a demo of a hack. I'll then go through stats on breaches from this year, from the current government stats that have been released this month. Then looking at the implications of a breach to a business. And then discussing what options and defences that we can put in place to help mitigate this to some degree. And then finalising with a question and answer. So as mentioned before, the Q&A is open throughout the session today, so please feel free to drop in any questions that you have. So Enhanced, we've been running for just over 30 years now. We're an employee ownership trust, and we work with businesses of all sizes and all natures. We started off as a software business in those early days, and now we look after IT holistically for customers, working with businesses to deliver kind of IT strategies to grow their businesses. So how do we work with businesses? Initially, we look at the security. So this is what we think that underpins any form of data integrity for any business. And then looking on to collaboration. So since COVID, this has become really critical for businesses that are looking at hybrid working, making the most of Microsoft Teams and other applications. And then looking to make efficiency gains, both from a cost perspective and also looking at a time perspective and using the applications that we've invested in better, all to deliver additional growth for businesses that we work with day to day.
So a little about me. I'm Johnny. I do have a technical background, but I haven't been in a technical role for quite a few years now. So rather than bring in a proper techie to run this demo, we thought we'd show you how easy it is for someone with basic IT knowledge, so me, to breach an unsuspecting user's email account in a relatively small amount of time. So we're going to use some software called Evil Jinx, as Lewis mentioned, to help us demo what is known as a man-in-the-middle reverse proxy attack, with the aim of stealing a user's Microsoft 365 credentials and session token to take over their email account. So Evil Jinx is readily available on the internet. It's not something you have to go to the dark web for. And this demo is not intended as a guide to help you guys breach email accounts. Please don't do that. We simply want to show you how easy it is. So what we'll need. So I used a straightforward Evil Jinx guide that's readily available online. You don't need to be on a dark web or anything scary like that. If you Google Evil Jinx guide, it will probably be the top result. So I set up the software locally on my PC. But if we're going to do this for real, we'd need to purchase a basic web server running Linux from a hosting provider, and we'd also need a domain, something plausible enough for our victim to click on. For example, m365login.co.uk, which was available to purchase when I checked earlier. So I've already downloaded and installed the prerequisite programming language software, which is called Go. And I've already downloaded and unzipped the Evil Jinx software. So we'll also need some fishlets, which are configuration files used to proxy legitimate websites into a phishing website. So you can see there are fishlets available for loads of services: AWS, Dropbox, Facebook, Google, etc. But for this demo, we're going to download an Office 365 fishlet, which I've already downloaded. So running Evil Jinx. So here's the Evil Jinx software already downloaded, and I've already put the Office 365 fishlet into the fishlets folder. To build Evil Jinx, we'll need to run the build batch file, which will create the executable. And then to start the software, we'll need to run the build run batch file. So you can see it's loaded the fishlets. Here's Evil Jinx, and it's loaded the fishlets folder here. So I've got Google in there as well, which I was playing with, and the Office 365 fishlet. So first we need to configure a domain. For this demo, I'm going to use notafish.com just to make it obvious. But if I were to do this for real, again, I'd probably choose something similar to Microsoft or Office 365, like m365login.co.uk or something like that, to make the URL plausible enough for our victim to click on. So the command for this is config domain notafish.com. or whatever domain we're using. Next, we need to configure the IP address. So I'm just going to use my local PC's IP address. But if I were to do this for real, I'd use the IP address of the web server we'd have purchased. And the command for this is config IP4 and the IP address. So next I need to point my O365 fishlet at the not a fish domain. So the command for this is fishlist, the host name, which is O365, so the name of the fishlet, and I'm going to use o365.notafish.com. So there we go, it's enabled the fishlet. So I'm going to enable a fishlet, sorry, using the command fishlets enable O365. And we can check the status of the fishlets by typing fishlets. And then you can see O365 fishlets now enabled. So now we'll need to get the DNS records we need by typing fishlets, get hosts, and the name of the fishlet again, O365. So I've already updated the host file on my machine, but if I were to do this for real, these would be the DNS records I'd need to set up on a domain I'd have purchased. So next we're going to create the lure. This is the link we want our user to click on, or our victim to click on. So the command for this is lures, create, and then again the name of the fishlet, O365. And then we need to get the URL, the actual lure. So we just type the ID number in, so get lures, get URL 0. And there's our lure, there's our link that we want our user to click on. So now let's test it out. So we're going to send the email from our hacker's email account, which is I've stupidly named hacky@outlook.com. If we were to do this for real, we'd make it look like a legitimate email from Microsoft 365, probably the domain we purchased. So let me just get signed in. So we're going to send the link or lure to our unsuspecting victim, who are again stupidly called Fishy McClickface. So this is an Office 365 account with MFA enabled that we're attempting to gain access to. Were we doing this for real, we'd want to make the email look as legitimate as possible with Microsoft 365 branding, etc. But for this demo, let's just say something like, Microsoft 365 password expiry, please click the link to re-authenticate your account ASAP to try and sort of catch the user out. We'll provide the link or lure that we got from EvilJinx. I'm going to copy that into my email. And let's send that to our victim Fishy. Next, let's pretend we're on Fishy's computer in their Microsoft 365 email account. So let's open Fishy's email. And there we go, we've just received the email, perfect. So I'll put Fishy's email and EvilJinx side by side so we can see what happens when they click on a link. So poor Fishy's going to click on the link. Let's wait for it to load. And now Fishy's going to enter their credentials, enter the email address and their credentials. There we go, all logged in. I'll just open his email. Okay, so in EvilJinx, we can see that we've stolen Fishy's multi-factor authentication session token. Just that. And we've also stolen the username and Fishy's credentials. So to list all the credentials and tokens we've managed to steal, we'll type sessions. And again, username, password, MFA session token, all stolen in one click of a link. So we'll grab the ID number for Fishy, which is 16, and we'll type sessions 16. And there's the cookie. This is Fishy's MFA session token, which is all we need to gain access to Fishy's email. So we're going to copy the session token. And then again, we're putting ourselves back in the sort of shoes of the hacker. So we're going to open a browser. Let's open a browser. Sorry, let's go incognito. And I'm going to use a Chrome extension, so storage ace I used, to import the session token. So again, this is that session token I just stole. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to click refresh to load the cookie. And boom, we're straight into Fishy's Microsoft 365 email account. So let's open Fishy's email just to check. And there you have it. That's all it takes to gain access to someone's email account, even if they've got MFA enabled.
Great. Thanks, Johnny. It's probably worth noting at this point as well that we're quite often seeing where actually there's been a breach of someone else to then initiate that against, say, a particular customer. So they may have been hacked themselves and then sending out emails from that hacked account with the law in there as well. So utilising that existing account from a known party that you're expecting an email from. They've got that detail and reference of any communications that you've had with that customer, so that they can make it legitimate. So as mentioned before, I'm going to go through a quick few stats. So this is from the Cybersecurity Breach Survey, which was released April this year from the government. And just to give you some ideas of the number of breaches based on the business size. So SMBs, we're seeing around 25%. It's worth noting that, again, even the government are saying this, it's actually a lot of SMBs don't realise that they've actually been breached. So this is only reported breaches to the ICO. And then we're seeing a much closer resemblance around the kind of 40 to 50% in medium and larger businesses. Again, some of this will be down to those larger businesses having the checks and measures in place to actually detect a breach in the first place. So really high numbers, and something that was definitely for food for thought. And then kind of looking on to the breach methods. This is based on breaches that had fiscally impacting to a particular business. So this isn't a percentage of breaches as the kind of breach source necessarily. These are the ones that have been fiscally impacting. So phishing attacks represent kind of 50% and over of the attacks that we've seen that have actually, as I had some form of financial element to them, but actually it's even a larger percentage than this that we're seeing as a breach impact in general. But say in some cases it may be that they're using your account to breach another customer. So actually there's no fiscal impact, but there's other implications that we'll discuss later. Direct hacking of bank accounts is the second, around 26%. Taking over of a user's account, and then we're looking at things like unauthorized access. But it's interesting to say viruses and ransomware, which were very, very prevalent previously, you're only sitting at 2 and 1% of all breaches that are actually having any impact financially. I say ransomware for quite some time was a much higher percentage of this, and that's where a machine is attacked and it's encrypting files across a network and then holding you to ransom to be able to unencrypt those files. And then looking at businesses and what security plans and measures they have in place. So at the moment, only 40% of UK businesses have multi-factor authentication in place. Whilst it's not a complete fail-safe, it's far easier to breach someone's account based on just user credentials alone. So yeah, really low on this specific thing. And then looking at critical patching. A lot of businesses don't have a policy in place to basically put patches in place within 14 days of a release. So we're sitting at only 30% or a third of businesses. And then businesses that actively test their users by doing simulated phishing attacks, so actually sending out fake phishing emails to train their staff, we're sitting sub 20%. 1 in 5 businesses are doing this. And given that it's sitting at over 50% of those breaches that we were discussing before, it's a really critical thing that businesses need to be looking at. Improving though, cyber insurance. I say again, this is something that we've been discussing with our customers for some time, and we've seen growth in our own customer set. We're sitting at 60% of businesses now have cyber insurance in place for their businesses. And then also looking at cyber security and business continuity, we're sitting at 60% again. But again, this is some form of plan or measure. This may not be any kind of disaster recovery plan attached to that. So what are the implications of a breach? We've already mentioned quite a few times that financial extortion is probably the one that everyone thinks of. So that's directly impacting your business. So it may be a case that someone has maybe sends fake bank details through and extorted £50,000 on a bank transfer. But the things that people don't really think about is stuff like reputational damage. So this may be a case that you're having to admit that there's been a breach to yourselves, there may have been lost data. If you have cyber insurance in place, this is a really critical function that they provide. So when you speak to your cyber insurer, they will manage all the communications to your customer set to minimise that exposure for you, and basically providing enough detail legally that they're explaining the situation without putting you at risk. And then data loss. So this isn't necessarily your data, and I say that's the thing that most people think about as well. What happens if my database is lost and I can't access my customer details? But actually, quite a lot of cases is the loss of customer data. So they can potentially put a lawsuit into yourselves to say that you've lost their data, and the ramifications of that need to be considered as well. And then looking at what we can do. So majority of our customers here have Microsoft Business Premium, so this would be equivalent of something like the Enterprise E3 plan for anyone that's on enterprise SKUs. So within that plan, we can look at identity management. This could be for users and devices, and we'll discuss how this falls into conditional access in a minute. Then looking at continual access evaluation. So this is where we're looking at the location that devices are running from using what's known as the GSA client, which I'll cover off in a second. And then conditional access, which sits above this and uses all these checks and measures to provide kind of access based on these particular identity measures. So for those that don't know, haven't used conditional access or may not understand kind of what the use case for this will be. So as mentioned before, this is based on signals. So we've talked about identity. This is potentially the user, their current location. So all your credentials and everything are managed within Microsoft Entra ID rather than a traditional domain. Then looking at the devices that we have in place. So whether we're looking at company-owned devices, bring your own devices, we can then manage what devices can access a network. And you may do large level blocks. You may say, actually, within our organization, we don't use Linux or Mac devices, therefore block any access to corporate data from these device types. Then particular applications, you may have applications that need to talk to 365, especially if you're using things like single sign-on, so limiting the access from third-party applications. And then if you have Entra ID Plan 2, which we'll go on to in a minute, we can look at real-time risk measures. So with this plan in place, what it will look at is measures such as where was the last login location, the time between locations, so something that's referred to as possible travel. So if I was to log in Poole, where we are today, and I was logging in Birmingham within a 15-minute time frame, it would say, actually, that's an impossible travel mechanism, and then my risk score would be increased. And then we can set the threshold of that Microsoft identified risk score to say, actually, if we're over 50% risk, do not provide entry to that user. So with those signals, we can then determine what access methods we're going to be using. So we're going to just allow access because actually we're in a trusted location, we've logged into that location every time, or do we prompt for MFA? So quite a lot of customers will say, actually, if we're going to be accessing information from an unknown source, always require MFA. And then potentially we will limit access based on those signals. You may go, actually, if you're on a personal device, we'll provide you access, but it's going to be limited. And what do those limits look like? Well, it's going to limit the applications and data within 365 and also our single sign-on applications that we provide. So you may say, for a personal device, we'll let you access corporate email, but we won't let you access SharePoint, for instance. So we're providing kind of as limited access as possible based on the user type and their locations. So moving on to Entra Global Secure Access. So specifically, I'm going to be discussing Microsoft Entra Internet Access. So this came into effect at the end of last year. So this is a client that can be installed on the device, and then it basically will pass through any internet access through to Microsoft. This could also be passed through to any of your private applications, so replacing any VPNs that you currently have. So that uses Entra Private Access, which is part of this GSA and uses the same client, but are two licensed products. Entra Internet Access is included as part of Entra ID Plan 1, and I'll discuss how that works with these type of hacks that we've just discussed now. So one of the functions this enables is what's known as compliant network check. So this is a conditional access policy that will basically reference that if you would only enable access to Microsoft resources for clients that have the GSA client installed. So in this case, if I was to connect from my device, I'll be given a refresh token and an access token to the application if I'm running through the GSA client, which is going via the private internet access. But if I was to use a Evil Jinx and click on Johnny's link that I mentioned earlier, once that goes out via the proxy, it's not going to have that network compliance in place. So it may have stolen the session token, but it won't be given an access token potentially. So it's going to be rejected because of that particular check that's in place there. And then moving on to Entra ID Plan 2. So this is a separate product that can be purchased on top of the plan that you get with Business Premium. So as mentioned before, with that risk scoring, the identity protection, this is a major function that this provides you. So this gives you that kind of AI-based scoring system that's going to be looking at a lot of checks and measures to make a determination on how risky a login is. And then we've also got token protection. So this is where we can basically continue to evaluate that token against a particular application and have the ability to revoke tokens. So this is the true way of being able to block it entirely, because say with internet access that we discussed, that proxy attack would only be possible if you went via a proxy server rather than malware that was installed on the device. If the actual attack happened on a device level, then it'll be bypassed.